Washington's history, and that's its Newtown years, because we've heard about it, say, 1,000 years ago in the old hall here, and some colourful characters, mainly from the 19th century, and you've got a good flavour of its industrial history with chemicals and mining. And so if you go back to the early 1800s, the population of what is now Washington was only around about 2,000. But with the coming of the deep mines in this part of the Durham coalfield and the shafts that opened, it sucked in migrants. So it's been an area of migrants forever. And when you get to World War I, the population is getting to about 20,000. And to give you an idea of the extent of mining, if you go onto the Coal Authority website and you've got the patience to count the number of shafts that have been discovered in history, you'll come to a figure of 137 in this area of Washington. And I'm sure if you went to other parts of the county, you could find similar. But as, again, with a lot of the coalfield, it really suffered after World War I. And so the population stuttered, the mining output dropped, and as we've seen from the time of the miners' strike and so on, became quite deprived. County Durham was an enthusiastic adopter of new towns. This was a post-war Labour government programme, mostly a ring round London and the central belt of Scotland, but two new towns in County Durham, down at Aycliffe and Peterlee. And so whilst there was some sort of recovery in the 1950s, the North East generally was still lagging behind the rest of Britain. It really hadn't picked up the newer industries, electrical and smaller engineering base that emerged after World War I. So County Durham was advocating to have another new town, and was going to compulsory purchase a large lump of what is now Washington as to be its growth area. The significant change that was coming was the A1 was being built and the A19 was going to be built on the other side. They come to a point, that's Washington. It was always going to be an area of development. And then what swung it was the Hailsham report, which you might have heard of. Lord Hailsham, the Chancellor at the time, came up, and among the measures that he proposed for the North East as a whole was to beef up Aycliffe and Peterlee and have a new town at Washington. Aycliffe and Peterlee had very poor starts in the 1940s and 50s. They suffered from the deprivations, the shortage of materials and labour after the war. The control, there was very little local control. Central government kept its fingers on everything. They didn't put in the appropriate infrastructure. Washington was determined not to build a new town like that. It had total control and got off to a flying start. 1964 designated, 1965 starts. 1966 they produce the new town plan. This is the Bible that built the place, and in here you will find an analysis of the state of the economy, what it was trying to achieve, and the principles that would be behind how it would be developed. And really, for the next 20 years, this is what the new town development going to say, this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. And I've told you that figure, 1964 to 1988, way beyond single administrations of government and elections and so on. And some of the principles here are absolutely amazing. they had a target of 80,000 people. The population was around about 20,000, of which 4,000 were miners in 4 working pits at Harriton, the F Pit, the Glebe and Usworth. They were already in programme to be closed. So the corporation had a unique set of work which was to manage the rundown of those mines, to reclaim the dereliction that there had been before, including that of the chemical industry, and you saw that picture of the waste heap, and build a new town that would be radically different than anything else that had ever been seen on Tyneside. Radically different, it would look different because of the architecture that we bring in. Its focus would be on those newer manufacturing industries to move away, and it would look to arrest the population decline that was occurring in this part of the world. Interestingly, it's Britain's only urban new town. In other words, it's cheek by jowl with the populations that were going to move in. So it didn't really suffer from the new town blues, because people weren't being shipped out 50 miles or away from bomb damage or whatever. Family was still a bus ride away in South Shields or Sunderland or Chester Street or Gateshead, even some from Newcastle. Very brave of them, crossing the river. And that was approved in 1966, but the corporation already started. And you'll see they started laying down the highways, the 1 mile grid road system, and how did they decide then to designate the residential areas? Well, as we need a population of 80,000, that we would build residential villages that could take a primary school with a 3-form entry, and no child would cross a road to go to school. 150 kids coming in multiplies up to a population of around about 4,500. Divide 80,000 by 4,500, you get 18. We'll have 18 villages. So the 18 residential villages are determined by that, and you'll see them clustered around more the centre of the town. A large shopping centre at the middle, the first covered shopping centre in the northeast, and then breaking away from traditional industry, a whole series of employment areas around the periphery of the town, which would all be accessible by any means, car, foot, bicycle, bus or whatever. And because it was an urban new town, i.e. very close, cheek by jowl with everywhere else, it was never closed. In other words, there would always be people commuting in and residents would always be commuting out. And that's true to this day. Roughly half the jobs in the town are taking people who come in, half people, workers in this town, commute out. So it's economically no different than anywhere else. It lives or dies by the economy of the region as a whole. But it was built at breakneck speed, and some 15 years after it started, it's more or less finished. So those of you who've got memories of that will have seen the roads spouting up and the housing, and you'll have seen the big announcements of the companies that moved in and so on. It had an unfair advantage over everywhere else because government would direct inquiries from the north to Washington, and it very rapidly overtook, Acres and Peterlee, who were only just getting their correct infrastructure in at the same time that Washington is. So the people of Washington they're made up of those that predate the new town. So they've got a memory of its mining heritage in particular. That those that were brought up or moved because of being a new town, there's an amazing number of people of an age now who say they've lived in their new house since the early 70s. They came and stayed, and they brought their children up here. And then, of course, you've got later generations who don't know any difference. It's just where they are. I've got a lot of material here that developed by the corporation. So that, in essence, was the master plan. So showing you there, the yellow areas are the residential, the red in the centre, the town centre, and the purple areas around the periphery, the employment areas. The other thing that distinguished Washington from the rest of the northeast was the amount of green space. Every residential area has got a huge amount of fresh air space. I came to appreciate that during COVID. You know, when we had to do our compulsory walking for an hour. So each day I walked around one of these villages, and I was amazed at the amount of green space. Some of it looked after, and the others sort of semi-wild, as well as a large town centre park, big golf course, the reclaimed area at the river that's created the riverside walk there. Go back in history, that was an area of heavy industry. So as well as mining, there was shipbuilding even up until the 18th, in the age of the wooden ships, and after that we moved further down the weir. Staves that came from the Lambton mines that we heard about earlier, and the Washington mines. So it's a staggering transformation in quite a short period. And when we hear all the whittering on today about housing targets and how many can they do and all the rest of it, they just got on and did it. Mm-hmm. It collected a whole slew of inward investment, but many of the names that came you recognise as long gone. Mm-hmm. So Timex, well, they're making mechanical watches. Well, that didn't last, did it? Philips making TV components are gone. Water Scott with paper products and so on. What it really missed out on was the growth of the service industry. So it really didn't develop the call centres that came later. However, still the biggest employer has been central government. So the big government office block you see in the centre there, Durham House, and another one down at the waterside next to the waterfowl park. So they are still the biggest employers. So it's the waterfowl park's interesting as well. Again, developed by the corporation from the wastewater coming from the water treatment plant. That's just that 1 or 2 degrees warmer before it goes into the river. And that's what attracts the birds. You might wonder why do all these exotic birds that migrate with pixelware like that? It is distinctly different than the water elsewhere. The corporation actively marketed its link with Washington. And so George Washington's face very much was on a lot of the material, and particularly going and selling it to American investors. You know, a bit of their history. Well, we'd like to tell them the story that as the name before Washington was Heartburn, if they hadn't come here, their capital city would be Heartburn, DC. But of course, the greatest achievement on the economic front was attracting Nissan. So a few years previously there'd been a big failure in attracting the Hitachi TV company, who had decided to come to Washington, but somebody blabbed, and the TV industry, the TV union went nuts about it, and the government chased them away. And the recriminations here were pretty bad, and if another big project comes along, the decision was everybody would work together. So when Nissan breaks, and it comes to Tyne County Council, straight away they bring it to Washington Development Corporation. It will be a Washington-led project. And the site chosen was the airfield at Sunderland, owned by Sunderland Council. So there you've got the three partners, the County Council, the Borough Council as they were at the time, and the Development Corporation. But everything took place in Washington. Applying that expertise that developed over the previous 20 odd years of negotiation with international investors. And a very powerful message was the building of the new town, because we showed them those images of what it was like in 1964 with the pit heaps and the dereliction. We showed them that master plan that I've shown you, and that was over the middle panel. This is the plan, this is what we're going to do. And then every 2 years there used to be an aerial mosaic photograph taken of the town to show the progress so far. And we said, well, this is what's been achieved so far. So you could see problem, plan, delivery. And that was the main message, that if Nissan come here, that their economic, their business objectives would be met, that the North East would build the project for them. And here we are, 35, 36, 37 years later. And if you think about it, so much brand new infrastructure had been put into the place. New gas lines and power, and the housing we talked about, and the social infrastructure. Along comes a big project that literally just plugged in. It didn't require any great big diversions to service that site. We were able to just take it over and get on with it. I talked there about the social infrastructure, and that's the point about a new town. It was the complete picture. It wasn't addressing a housing problem or just an economic problem, it was the whole thing. So things like health centres and schools and nurseries were all planned and came on steam. There's even cases here of schools being built 2 years before a child entered them. Can you imagine that today? Maybe not. So the corporation was a central government body and had lots of money. So lots of big prestigious events occurred in those years. So in 1977 in particular, who turns up? Well, President Carter, the Queen on a Jubilee, and Muhammad Ali. It was quite a year. Just Sans Frontières took part at in the town centre. They had the Japanese Kite Festival that ran for many years. There was a lot of whole town events that attracted interest from the whole area. So that's a very, very rapid summary. I've got a lot of material here that the corporation produced, as well as maps, things like handbooks that were given to the residents, told you everything about moving into the town. Particular things on housing and the leisure facilities and on what to do. Every month, Washington New Town Review was delivered to every property in the town. And there's a special that did for 1977 where you'll find those visitors that we're talking about, the coming of the golf course. Well, there's a good example of the highway that suddenly appeared. Now, and you've got memories of the past, probably remember the district numbers. Yes? Oh, yes. That was bizarre. That arose because of building on a grid. When you come into the town, you couldn't list all 18 residential areas and all 9 employment areas. You couldn't have that on a single roadside because it wasn't a linear town. We'll use numbers instead. And where do these numbers come from? Well, they're the 50 most strategic roundabouts in Washington. And the theory was, you want District 4. So as you enter the town, you see there, oh, District 4, there it is. You're saying straight up, I'll keep going, You kept going to District left, I'll keep going. When District 4 disappeared off your signs, you're there. Yeah, well, we didn't have great big signs that said 4. But the theory was you're only about 100 metres away from, your eventual destination. But bizarrely, the boundaries of the districts didn't coincide with the new residential areas that were being built. So somewhere like Albany, half of it was in District 2 and half in District 4, because you could come into it from more than one roundabout. So, although that was abolished completely in 1983, which is 40 years ago, that is the reputation that Washington has to this day, just from that one decision.
When was it? 1983?
1983, sorry, it was abolished.
When I moved up here in the early 1990s, it was still like that then?
No, the signs had long gone. They were all gone completely.
Yeah.
I thought they were there a bit longer.
Still 98 years here.
No, you would see, you might have seen some stuff that hadn't been taken down,
Yeah.
but they were abolished in 1983.
Yeah.
So there you go. So, as I say, it's a very quick summary, and I haven't talked about individuals, which you heard about earlier, the personalities, because we are talking about going from 20,000 to 80,000 people, and if there are personalities involved, it's maybe the 600 or 700 people who work for the Development Corporation who created the place, and the strength they got was having a very precise plan to work to. So,
Do you know who created the plan? Was that also?
yes, that was a company called Llewellyn Davis. They were hired to do it. They were the premier urban planners in Britain.
Oh.
Who did the branding?
The branding was in-house, and it went through several iterations. It did different colour schemes, blue, brown, eventually that sort of red and black, and that typeface. They were forever rebranding and representing the same stuff, and in some respects, that's a powerful thing to do. Keep telling people the same message by different ways. Bill referred earlier to the posh booklet the corporation produced, and this is it. And this was at the very end, just to say, well, this is what we've done for you. So the early pages are the dereliction. What was, and that's the picture that the builder referred to with the heap. And then it's the body pictures. Look what we've done. Isn't it nice? We've taken the photographs on a sunny day, and they're in colour. Now here's a little fact for you. The cost of building the new town netted, in 1988, £92 million, half of which was a deficit on the value of the infrastructure, and the other half was outstanding interest charges. And since then, the remaining mainly commercial land and some housing land has been sold off for hundreds of millions. It was built by loans. It wasn't grant aided. Corporations borrowed from the Public Loans Board, a body that still exists to this day. Loans have to be paid back. The town has paid back several times over what it cost to build. And when I say £92 million, that's like the cost of a PPE project, bird masks that will never be worn. So, does that represent good value for money? Public money? Take a view.
Jed, can I ask you, for I think every 7 years, I think it was, the corporation made a film of the new town, showing how it developed. Are those films still available? Or
They're around. You can find some of them on YouTube. There's a whole load of really good ones from the late 60s, early 70s.
Yes, yeah.
The sort of ones.
I wonder what happened to them when the corporation closed down.
Oh,
I used to borrow them from.
yeah, and then the very last one built was called Building a Community. That was in 1988.